split, make a baby, and they have two of them. And those two become four, and those four become 16. The microsphere does not have that ability unless you shock it with lightning, or an intense electrical shock. It will replicate, but then it won't replicate again until you do it too. You've got to make it replicate. It's not living. It has no desire. It does not have that force of life, whatever it happens to be a living entity. But it's the same stuff. You do a comparison, a chemical comparison, a biological comparison between both these two entities, and they are almost identical, physically and chemically. One lives and one does not. What's the difference between the two? We go back to lightning during the transitionary period. We have all the energy in the world to force things to replicate. And it is believed that the actual force, if you want to take a natural stand, a natural viewpoint of this, perhaps the force, and I say perhaps because there is no way, I don't think, I don't see any way unless through direct experimentation and success that we're going to be able to determine what it takes to make a non-living entity that is organic and make it live. I mean, kind of a Frankenstein thing. We just don't have that power. Okay? Now, using the idea that the lightning creates the organic soup and that lightning can force something to replicate, we can also assume that energy creates the will to live. The life force that's in every one of us, everything that lives, the entire genre of biology contains a life force. We don't know what that is. But it is the one thing that allows us to procreate. It's the one thing that allows us to survive. So about 1 billion years, whatever changed from a microsphere amino acid complex into a living one-celled entity filled the oceans. And some of it began to go landward. So we've created life on this planet, and we've eliminated more odds. But life has to diversify. Now, what do I mean by that? Can you go out on an arid, completely desolate world with no other biology and survive? No, you cannot. This little guy, he hadn't got a chance. You have to have other biology for your biology to live. We have to have other species in order for our species to live. Every species does. From the smallest microbe to the largest animal, life has to diversify. That's why evolution has taken place over the past billion years. It has evolved so that, number one, there'll be a food source. The food chain had to be fulfilled, so we had to have a higher order of animals to consume the lower order of animals. For one thing, you have overpopulation of the lower component of the food chain. Diversification is simple. We've all seen the food chain chart. You know, we go, everything has to eat, and then once you eat and you die, you kind of go back and you're the thing sort of indirectly being eaten again. And then after we ended up with this diversification, which most of the time took place in the oceans, about 600 million years ago, things started crawling out of the oceans. And we had very complex animals in the oceans, and it wasn't until they actually began to start getting out of the oceans, about 20 million years later, maybe that was not very long on the geological scale, then they actually started the revolution of evolution. You can't read that. Don't walk away when I'm talking to you. That's my theory on how animals left the water. Once animals and biology became landbound, evolution took off. I mean, it literally just took off. And it became to the point where the earth was being invaded literally by so many millions of biological species. You know, looking at it from a supreme standpoint, looking down, thinking, can it take much more? Well, yes, it can. It seems to be able to have taken everything we've thrown at it. But one thing is for sure, evolution is a fact. Evolution has taken place. I have held in my hands, the first 6 years of my scientific life when I was just a little pup, was spent indexing the fossils of Arkansas, trying to find some sort of clear evidence between foamy water and the first Cambrian species. Arkansas is a field day for fossil people, paleontologists. And I spent a great deal of time digging through all these strata. I mean, I literally have held elements from every one of these strata. A shark's tooth from 350 million years ago to one from 20 million years ago. And I've seen the evolution from one to the other. I've touched that old truck at the top of that thing. That's my truck. Evolution did take place. The fossils are there. The fossil record does not lie. Yeah, and you see it, the deeper you dig, the older you get. So we can't ignore that scientific fact. And somewhere in the very top of that evolutionary stage, about 3 million years ago, mankind developed. Sort of out of nowhere. We try to make links, we try to have the Lucy, the missing links, but seemingly there is something really missing between basic primates and the human race. But let's just say 3 million years ago we got started, and evolution of the human race took off. And it was the first one that actually began to manipulate his environment because he was smart enough to do so. And so over a period of 3 million years, we've evolved on the earth and we've developed intelligence. Intelligence is the single most impressive factor that we possess. Your ability to have logic is supreme to everything else and every other species that exists on this planet. Now, are we the most intelligent and the most supreme throughout the entire universe? We don't know. But right now, we are supreme. So we have created, we've actually come up with our 5% just from this basic elimination right here. We've come up with a 5% that gives us the criteria based on a planet that's at the right place and all the conditions that are necessary to create a planet that might be like Earth. So everything, if you accept the science, everything that you have around you that lives is essentially related to you. Okay, we've got exoplanets and we've got Earths. Who's to say, and I've been asked this question many times, we have exoplanets, we have 20 million Earths around in our galaxy. How do you know they're not just exoplanets with no life on them? That's a good question. We really don't. But we can assume because of the odds and going from the 5% factor that they probably do have life. I wanted to put this in right here because this is a good example of misinterpretation. This is the same scripture quoting from Genesis 1:1 about God creating the heavens and earth. I did a little research on this some time ago. I do a lot of writing about Genesis and science. I like to combine what people believe and what we know and try to make sense out of it so that people can accept what they believe in with no problems. And an interesting thing that I stumbled across is that the idea of heavens and earth, that very God created the heavens and earth. And I was trying to find out if it could have been misinterpreted and perhaps heavens and earths, maybe plural. Well, no, it really didn't. Heavens was clearly plural and earth was clearly singular in the biblical text. So then I started looking at the original Hebrew text that was prevalent at the time of the writing of the Old Testament and to the translation from the original tablets. And I came across something very interesting. In the Hebrew language at that time, they had their slang just like we do too today, Theirs was probably a little cleaner than ours today. But heavens and earth in ancient Hebrew was slang. It was actually slang. It was like somebody said, well, heavens to Betsy. Heavens and earth was be like if you went and proposed to your girlfriend, in ancient Jerusalem and get down on one knee, and I promise I'll give you heavens and earth. Actually, that phrase in slang Hebrew means everything. Everything. That one little phrase, heavens and earth, was a slang phrase for everything. So if we take it and just change it about a little bit, God created everything, or the Big Bang created everything. So we can account for the fact that no matter what your belief, if you want to believe in Genesis and you want to believe in science, you can. That's my point. You can. Or any it doesn't have to be the Bible. It can be any other document or just simply a naturalistic belief. You can make your faith work. You can make your belief work with the way science gives you the facts. But it really doesn't matter. This whole thing of creation And the concept of planets being made has happened. We have trillions and trillions, probably countless numbers of planets out there. And many, many of them are indeed Earths. The odds against it, based on just the conditions that I've showed you, the natural conditions that have to take place to create a planet Earth, those conditions exist throughout the universe, not just in our own Milky Way. So let me talk very briefly about exoplanets and how we've come about this entire revolutionary thing, which should be on Fox News tomorrow morning. We know we found all these planets. We found many of them directly. We've confirmed well over 6,000, and we know that they exist. We know exactly where they are. And we have 20 million of them in our Milky Way. And you can see here, this is just kind of a basic chart of how the discoveries really went up exponentially as time went on. It's because of our technology. But look at how they shot up. But what I wanted you to see here is that the green represents transit. It's not easy to spot a planet in deep space. If you had the largest telescope on Earth, or the Hubble telescope in space, and you turned it toward the richest star field, the biggest, brightest star that you can see out there tonight, what are you going to see? You going to see this big old star with a planet going around it? No. You're going to see, just like you do with your naked eye, you're going to see a tiny little orb. You cannot magnify a star. No telescope on Earth can magnify a star. They're too far away. There'll be pinpoints no matter how hard you try to look. A transit of a star means that they found something. You see the black dot? They found something that would go across a star while they were watching it, and actually very slightly and very sophisticated sensitive instruments would detect a slight drop in the brightness of that star that they happen to be aimed at. And you can see the light curve beneath there and the little object, which happens to be an exoplanet, going across the surface of that star. Now in the telescope, even in the big ones, you're not going to see it look like this, but you will get that light curve. And so that's how the transit indirect method is detecting so many of them. The Kepler telescope, which I left out Kepler in the beginning of my talk, and I probably shouldn't have, the Kepler telescope is responsible for discovering most of them. Almost all the exoplanets being found today are with Kepler. In one day, Kepler found 1,000 back in July, just last July. And of those, a few of them bear pointing out. Notice here that these over here on this side, the far left, 68 are Earth size, and the great majority are about the size of Neptune. They're in the center in the orange. Now that shouldn't alarm you. That means, well, there's just not many Earth size at all. No, the difference is that Earth is pretty small compared to Neptune. A larger planet going across a distant star is going to dim it much more significantly than a tiny star, or a tiny planet. So Earth-like, it's going to take a little bit more work to actually detect dimming of stars by planets. The length of time it takes that star to go across the planet to go across the sun's surface will determine the orbit, how far away from that star that planet happens to be. So we can actually determine the orbit of those planets. And one of them that we did looks like it kind of goes contrary to the Earth theory. This one is the largest orbit of any exoplanet known, even though we've got 6,000 of them. This was found recently. It takes 702 days for this particular planet to go around its mother star. That seems like a long time. It's almost 2 years. In other words, its year would be 702 days. Well, really, in perspective, that's okay, because remember, Mars was in our Goldilocks zone. Mars takes well over 2 years to make one trip around the sun. So this is well within the Goldilocks zone of that particular star. And this is a planet for real. This is one of the most interesting ones right here. We just found it. It too was found by Kepler, 78. And it's interesting because it is almost exactly Earth size. And it also happens to be in the Goldilocks zone around this particular star. And that's significant.